Welcome to Invest Out West podcast. I'm Nat Micken.
And I'm Carlia Micken. We are a husband and wife team who live and invest in Western Queensland.
Join us on our journey of creating passive income through mindset, business, crypto, and property investing. Welcome to Invest Out West episode number 44.
The quote we'd like to leave with today comes from Benjamin Franklin, where he says, "An investment in knowledge pays the best interest."
Yeah, today we're just going to talk about cash flow versus net worth and the benefits of cash flow because a lot of property investors in Australia and a lot of investors in Australia, sort of full stop, focus very much on net worth rather than cash flow. And listeners to this podcast know that we focus a lot more on cash flow, like in our properties and that sort of thing, rather than the actual net worth. And I've been thinking about this topic sort of over the last couple of weeks, and I was listening to Ryan Pineda. His podcast is called The Wealthy Way, and it's a really good podcast. I definitely recommend that podcast. And I was listening to one of his podcasts yesterday, and he was talking about this very topic, and it sort of fitted in with what I'd been thinking over the last week or so. And he was saying about how that like people focus on net worth and that sort of thing. And he said like that's all very well, but net worth doesn't pay the bills, cash flow does. And he was talking about how that like net worth is good in, say, like in your old age when you've gone and put a whole portfolio together, and you've got all this net worth later on that you might be able to sell it off or loan against it or whatever, and you've got lots of money. Say by the time you're 60 or 70, but he's like, I want the money now, and he's sort of in his mid-30s, mid to late 30s, and he's like, that's all very well, but I want the lifestyle now, so the only thing that's going to do that is cash flow. And so it really got me thinking about that. Grant Cardone is another one that talks about the same sort of thing, and he says, one of his sayings is, cash is not king, cash flow is king. And what he means by that is, listeners to this podcast would also know that we're very heavy in crypto and very, very skeptical of the fiat currency situation as it is. And what Grant's talking about there is that fiat, like cash, he's really sort of meaning fiat, is sort of like it's not something that you want to save or rely on, but just a constant cash flow, like a constant stream of money coming in, is far more reliable than having money that you're sitting on saving type of thing. And this is the thing, like, cash flow is what makes the world go around, because it's what pays for your lifestyle, it's what pays your bills, it's what gives you financial freedom, all those type of things. Whereas net worth, you can be very asset rich and very cash poor. And net worth doesn't necessarily pay for any of those things, whereas cash flow does. So that's why we focus very heavily on our properties, on our real estate portfolio to be cash flow positive. because that is what we're looking to do with real estate is to make it a cash machine that just spits off cash, rather than sort of buy something that you sit on for, maybe a couple of decades, and then you think, well, what am I going to do with that in the future? Am I going to sell it, or am I going to borrow against it, or what can I do? So it got me thinking about that, and so we decided to do this episode on that topic. And I have talked in the past about that we'd get in a bit more in the weeds and talk about some of the numbers and that sort of thing, what we look at in an investment property. And so I decided to touch a little bit on that today. Sort of straight after COVID, I guess, was probably in our buy area where we focus on buying investment properties, which is inland Queensland. After COVID was probably about the best time to really to buy property and have it as a really strong cash flow, because interest rates were like well down, lowest we're probably ever going to see them again, and lowest they'd been for a very long time, if ever. And on top of that, rents had gone stupid over COVID, but in this area, property prices themselves hadn't really matched the rents. So like they were still reasonable priced, but they were like, you could buy a good house, like for a very good price, but get a lot of rent and pay very little for the money that you borrow. And so it was a really good situation. But over the last sort of, I'd say probably 1 to 2 years, I guess, probably mainly like, a year to 18 months, I guess, is when things have really started to shift, and with property prices here in our buy zone, and rents, like rent return has sort of stabilised, but property prices have gone up and interest rates have gone up. So it's a lot harder now to find those deals that we were finding once upon a time. Now it's definitely not impossible, and this is the like the argument I have with different people that say that it's impossible to find property in Australia for a decent price and to be able to make money on it and all that sort of thing. And I always argue, and I say, like, it's definitely not impossible, but it's just harder. It's a lot of hard work. You got to go through, like, maybe you got to look at 100 different deals before you get one that starts to fit the boxes. So it's definitely harder, but it's still definitely not impossible. So the biggest problem today is our interest rates compared to what we were paying. Now, something that I've looked at for a fair while, and it's always sort of annoyed me, is that when you look at a property like a house, for instance, like it might be say it's a 3-bedroom house on realestate.com.au, for instance, and or it might just be on a local agent's website, and the agent will have on there all about the house, and then they'll say, oh, it's already rented out, the tenant in place, and they'll say something like, oh, and it's making a 9% return or something like that. And you think, oh man, that sounds all right. But they're only talking about gross rather than net. And this is something that sort of we need to be really careful about with that sort of with agents talk like that, because they're just sort of trying to keep the figure up as much as possible. Now, I just did a quick Google search on gross versus net rental yield. So the AI overview comes back and says gross and net rental yield are two ways to measure the profitability of a rental property, but they differ in how they account for expenses. Gross rental yield is a simple calculation of annual rental income as a percentage of the property's value without considering ongoing costs. Net rental yield, on the other hand, is a more accurate representation of profitability because it factors in all expenses associated with owning and managing the property, such as maintenance, insurance, and property management fees. And that's something I really wanted to point out because to be a cash flow property, it has to be all expenses included, and what are you left with? Steve McKnight, his book is 0 to 130 properties in 3.5 years. And his, like, when he wrote that book, which is going back a fair few years now, he actually talked a lot about, in his graphs and that sort of thing, talking about his repayments included in his what he worked out as his return. And I've never really found anybody else to do that. I sort of find that the best way I can sort of work out your return is you work out your property price, and then you minus all your costs, and then you work out what rent you're going to get, and then you put that percentage against your your interest rate, what the money is costing you, and work out what that spread is, because that's all investing is just we're taking out the spread in between our costs and our returns. And so there's rental return calculators, just free rental return calculators that you can just Google and pick them up. I've just done a quick Google search here, rental return calculator. ING Bank has got one, First National Real Estate has got one, Ian Ritchie Real Estate's got one. There's just a whole range that you can just grab and then you just open them up and put your figures into. I seem to get on well with the First National Real Estate one. It just seems to have a pretty good layout, but they're all pretty well exactly the same. So all you do is you just get that, and you put in your property purchase price, and then it just, you put in all your expenses, so like your insurance, your rates, and your property management fees, and then you just press calculate rent at the calculate rental yield at the bottom, and it just spits out the number of the percentage that you're that you're looking for. So getting back to an agent might say it's like 9% or something return, but that when you put that into a rental calculator and you say, okay, property price is this, you put in your rent, and then you minus all your costs, like your rates and your insurance, which is your two major costs. You put those in, and then you press you press the calculate button, and it'll come back at maybe 5% or 4% or something like that. It's nowhere near the 9 or the 8 or the 10 or whatever that they were originally trying to say that it was. And it's not right, what they're actually saying, because if you were just to put those put those figures in as face value, then it looks like you're actually making money. But when you put those figures into the calculator, you're actually losing money, because you've got to put that against the return, against the interest rate that you're going to pay for that money, and you just work out what percentage of the spread that you're going to get. So, we're paying, the official interest rate at the moment is 3.85%, but what we're paying from the banks, like we're sort of on our loans, we're sort of paying between 7 and 7.5% for our money. So you've got to be getting a net yield of above 7.5% before you're only just breaking even. So, like, if you can get a property that can do, like, say 10%, 9 or 10% return, and say you get a 10% return net, and you're paying like 7% interest, well, you're then getting like you're making 3% on the spread. So that's only works if you're only doing an interest-only loan. Also, you've got to take into consideration the fact that you might be paying interest and principal at the same time, which makes makes it a lot worse for you to actually cash flow. So yeah, I just sort of wanted to point that out because it's a lot harder to find cash flow properties than what it seems. If you're just to go and buy any property for the sake of it, well, most properties are negative, like negative cash flow. So they're costing you money rather than putting money in your pocket each month. It's sort of like I was saying before. It's a situation we're in at the moment where rents have sort of plateaued, but we're paying so much for the money that we're borrowing, and property prices have gone up at the same time. So it's a lot harder to try and find something that pencils. We have been looking for a little while at a deal in one of our buy area towns. And it's a shop, like a shop building that's rented out to the government for a senior citizens club, I guess, for want of a better term. It's where the senior citizens sort of hang out all day, and that would be a really good property. It's making a lot of money in rent, but no matter what way you put it into the calculator, it comes back at negative for the price that they're wanting for it, and so it's sort of something that we've just had to walk away from, even though we would have liked to have added it to our bag. Another thing I should just mention that is another factor to play into working out your rental yield is you've got the property price, but then to get the loan, like you might be putting in, say, 20% down. So you can put the property price as less that 20% into the calculator, so that actually makes it easier to cash flow. So that's something to sort of consider as well. So but like I was saying, you do have to then consider that you might be getting interest-only loan or a both loan, where you're paying the property off from day one, not just interest. It's definitely a lot easier to get something to cash flow if you're paying interest only, because you're just making the money on the spread between what you're getting and what you're paying. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of point that out. I might hand over to Carlia now. You got anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I mean, probably not a lot to add really, but just to reiterate, why we do the cash flow strategy that we do rather than the negatively geared, as we know it in Australia, the net worth strategy that Nat's been talking about. And of course, there's so many different arguments and different debate points that come up about this all the time. But what I wanted to talk about, just in context from what we do, what you often hear is when you hear of net worth / negatively geared investors, what their ambition is they're trying to use the property property investment as a tax strategy. So, for example, city dwellers specifically who are on high income, who are earning a high income, they want to have a property or something that they can then use as a tax offset against their high income. And of course that works well wherever you've got the income to cover what that property or that portfolio of properties is taking out of your pocket. But from our perspective, the reason why we class ourselves as cash flow maxis is because look, we don't really need more things taking money out of our pocket in the first place, but we have that as an income, and that's what's adding to our portfolio. And the more I thought about this, I've done a few calculations, and when you think of it, if you can earn, say, around say anything from like $25,000 to $50,000 per year in rent, that's being added to your bank account. Whereas on the flip side, if you're having to if you're a negatively geared investor, a net worth investor, that money to cover the expense of that property has been taken out of your pocket. And so the way we see it, we want as much income coming into us as we can, because as Nat's been saying, that's what ultimately then leads you to to the financial freedom that we're all seeking. And every property that we have has to pay for itself, because there's no point in having it taking money out of our pocket, because as I said earlier, we've already got enough expenses. And so this is why we're so passionate about being cash flow positive investors. And the other thing to point out too is when you say that you're cash flow positive investors, you'll often get the response that, oh well, we get our capital growth. But we get that as well, regardless of whether we're cash flow investors or net worth investors. We've still got our capital growth. As Nat's been saying, the property market has shifted from when we first started investing, so we've still got that as well. And the other thing to think about too is when you're focusing on cash flow, we get that income every week. So every week there's money coming into our bank accounts, and so it doesn't matter as such. With the interest rates that we've seen, they've been on a progress up, and they've just started to have a couple of cuts and bring them back down. That income's still there, and so the income from our properties is still coming in, and so every week something's coming in to cover whatever the interest rate fluctuation might be. And on the flip side, what we see is that income is, like as I've been saying, is coming in every week. But with net worth investors, with what we know as negatively geared investors in Australia, it's just paper worth. So you can't realise that gain unless you sell it, or unless you remortgage it, like refinance it and pull that equity back out. But that's all more steps to take, and it adds more complexity to it, because if you sell, well, then you've got to consider your capital gains. Have I owned this property more than 12 months? What's my capital gains loss going to be? And so there's so much more context to it. Whereas with us, because we're cash flow positive investors, it doesn't matter what the market itself is doing, because it's still an income for us, and it doesn't take money away from all of our other businesses and our other investments, because the houses are paying for themselves. And then of course there's always the argument about how the property market, has had significant growth in Australia. Like you often see, when people are talking about the capital cities, how much it's grown. I had the figures here. I just can't see them again. But it was, I've just forgotten what it was. But then we saw in the 2023 crash where it fell back down. And so what net worth investors had, that they had lost a certain percentage of their worth, even though it was still on paper. And so it's really a gamble. See, when we're cash flow investors, we know what we've got. So we know that we bought a house for this amount. We earn this much rent every week, and this is what our overall worth is. This is what our income is. Whereas with net worth, if they say, okay, I'm going to buy this house, I'm going to hang on to it, it's going to be used as a tax offset for the next 20 to 30 years, and then I'm going to sell it. Well, what is that going to be? What is that 20 to 30 year time frame? What is the value of that particular investment going to be? And so it just adds adds, from my perspective, and this is just all of our own perspectives, it just adds another layer of complexity. So that's sort of why I guess we're so passionate. And I guess it's true that it comes back to where you live and what you're familiar with. And for us out here, this is what we're so familiar with, and this is what we are so comfortable with. And you know, it's not so much an argument about who's right or who's wrong. It's just about debating, you know, like what floats our boat, you know, what ticks our boxes compared to what ticks the people who are net worth investors, what ticks their boxes. So yeah, I love having this debate. I often love talking about it, and always love to emphasize my point. And just to clarify, being a cash flow investor in Australia is very, very, very rare. It's so hard to hear your voice being heard, because it's just everyone's focused on being negatively geared, because that's the way that the tax system and even the government, to be honest, has made it that way, that's what they want to see. So yeah, that's sort of all I really had to add. But yeah, it's just a really good debate to have. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you definitely made some good points there. I was just thinking, like, Carly was just talking about, you know, with the value of property and that sort of thing, and it just sort of made me think, like, we could get up in the morning and realise that the value of you know, say one of our houses or all of our houses had dropped like 25% overnight, and we wouldn't lose any sleep over that, because as long as they kept being rented out and we were getting our rental money, then nothing else would change for us. So yeah, I really believe that's that's sort of like a buffer, I guess you could say, because we always say, like, that the capital growth that we do get, like, we don't get no capital growth, but that we always consider that as just a like a bonus on top, like that's the cream that we don't factor into the like into the deal to start with. So if it happens, well and good, and if not, well, it doesn't matter, because we still get our rental return, our cash flow every week. So another thing I just forgot to point out before is that with the property management side of things, and the return, like the percentage of return, if you was to pay a property manager, and they can sort of go into several percent of what you're getting for your rent, that comes out of your return. So that, like in your rental return calculator, for instance, there's a column there to put that in, management fee. And so with us, we do all our own management, so that's a cost that we can eliminate. So that keeps our return further up, which is definitely helps us to be cash flow positive on our properties, because we're not paying management fees. And you know, that's definitely not for everybody. Some people don't have the capacity to manage their own properties, or don't want to, or whatever. But we find that with us managing our own properties, it's definitely a cost that we don't have, that some people would have, so we can make our properties cash flow better than normal. So do you have anything more to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this whole subject around a portfolio growth perspective. And this is what we really love about it, is with the houses that we buy, you go and buy a house, you put someone in it and you earn your rent. So that gets added to your rent, to your income column. You know, when you go to a bank to get another loan, that's been added on. Whereas on the flip side, net worth investors, negatively geared investments, you know, this is what their income is, and yes, they hold that asset, but they have to have the cost of holding that asset as a negative against their income, and so that therefore it reduces their chances of being able to progress. And so it's just there's so many different talking points to weigh into it, but ultimately the reason why we do it is because why we do cash flow positive is because we don't know where we're going to be in 20 and 30 years time. We don't even know if you're going to be alive in 20 and 30 years time. And so, we believe strongly that life is for living. So what can we do today to make our life, the best it can be as of today? And that's why we've got our rental income coming in. It adds to our portfolio, it adds to our income, and that's why we use it, here today. And it's still able to be leveraged in the sense that adds to our income column, and then that adds to our overall net worth, because then we can use that income to take to the banks and say, hey, this is what we're earning, what can you do for us moving forward? So yeah, that's sort of all I really wanted to add, but it's just about, I guess, understanding what ticks your boxes, like what floats your boat. This is what floats our boat, and I would just encourage people just to do some research, like look into it, and like really tap in so you can understand exactly what you can do if you're looking to invest into the properties. And as Nat was saying, when you go to purchase something, you have to be very, very, very diligent about doing all your numbers and knowing what your standards are. And that touched on us looking at buying that commercial property, which we haven't gone through because the numbers haven't ticked all of our boxes. And this is what you got to remember. It's not about being caught up in the emotion. It's about being caught up in your strategy and sticking to your guns and understanding what that is, rather than having something you can talk about. We've talked about on the podcast in a different episode about the brag tax, and that weighs into it very, very much as well, because you can get so caught up in it. Because if you say I own this house in Sydney and it's worth $1.5 million, and I turn around and say, I own a house in Julia Creek and it's worth $100,000, of course people's eyeballs are going to be popping when they hear the $1.5 million compared to the $100,000. But we have to be convicted within ourselves as to what floats our boat. It doesn't matter what somebody else thinks or what somebody else says. We have to be very convicted in what we can make work for ourselves, for our own ambitions, and our own strategies, our own goals, our own income, and ultimately what our own future looks like for ourselves. So yeah, I'll just wrap up by saying that everything that we've shared here, nothing is ever financial advice. This is just us, again, we're just sharing our experiences and sharing, like these ways that we see things to try and encourage other people to do their own research, open that box and understand what's in there and find something that works for you. Yeah,
it's definitely an individual thing. It's just like we've been saying, like it's a very unusual thing to hear this type of debate in Australia, because it's very much a capital growth, focused, negative geared sort of property atmosphere, property investor atmosphere, I believe, in Australia. Whereas we sort of sit on the other side of the fence, and we just sort of we did this episode just to give voice to the other side of the fence, because you don't often hear it. So, but like I say, it's definitely an individual thing, and neither side's right or wrong. It's just a case of what suits the individual. So I think that's really all we've got on this one, and we sort of just wanted to get it out there, just so that we get people thinking about it and talking about it, and so just do your own research and keep looking for these sort of deals, because they're definitely out there. So that's about all for now, and keep living the dream.